Welcome back to Roll Dice or Leave. I completely lied to you, and I am still standing in the corner. Today we're going to talk about something that is completely system agnostic. It has to do with the practice of people doing live-streamed games. Especially with Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, it seems to be very popular that people are doing games like actual play or very scripted sessions. There's sort of a gambit of these games, but people are live streaming their games, recording their games, and uploading them to the internet. As live streaming video games has gotten more popular, or at least more mainstream over the last few years, I think that tabletop role-playing games want to kind of do the same thing, and there are some immediate problems with that. And the reason why I want to make this video now is because I just finished doing that video reviewing the last edition, which I played with Dungeon Master Johnny. We did a live-streamed campaign. I believe that it was 4 or 5 episodes long. I've linked his channel in previous videos. I'm going to do the same thing in the description. So you can actually watch this live-stream game that I'm in. Now that I've been part of one and I've watched some as well, we can more accurately evaluate this. I find that, as much as I like RPG Poundit or any of the other kind of old-school minded people, not necessarily super old, obviously I'm not that old, not consider myself one of them, but anyone who's sort of from the old school generally does not even try to engage with the newer stuff, and that makes it difficult to evaluate. So I think that now that I have tried it, even though maybe it's not a great fit for me and I don't really like it and have a lot of problems with it, I can give a more fair assessment, let's say. So the game that I was playing online was a sort of amalgamation of a bunch of different generations of Dungeons & Dragons. It was called The Last Edition. It's made by Dungeon Master Johnny. I have a review of it, as I've previously mentioned. The campaign that we were doing was in his custom sort of homebrew scenario that he has. I believe it's called Zaxia, the World. And we were actually given character sheets that were already pre-rolled for us before the game, which is a pretty good way to go. Let's back up a couple steps. There's sort of a range that you can go with. This is relevant to the character creation and shit, so that's why we're going to mention it now. There's a range of different possibilities when you're going to do a live stream game or like an actual play or what have you. One of them is that you just play exactly as you would if there was no audience. People will call that actual play. It's really common for like AD&D 2nd edition and shit like that. I've seen a lot of videos for that. And that is just like, it might actually just be like your gaming table is there and your DM and your players are around it and you just record it from an overhead camera or something like that. Which I think is probably like the most accurate type of recorded or live stream game. So I have a lot of respect for that. I've tried to watch some videos of it, and it's not necessarily as gripping or engaging because of the way that the audience sort of works in a D&D game. And this is going to be a main point later. We'll get to that. Put a pin in that one. And then there's sort of like a semi-scripted sort of... It's like an adventure path almost for Pathfinder or a module where everything is going to happen in a certain way. There's a loosely linear structure to everything, but you can kind of broaden to the sides. It's not like a straight hallway with there's wiggle room on the sides. And things can go in different directions, but you'll always sort of have the same starting and ending point. You can more accurately plan sessions to be 2 or 3 hours long, which makes them good like episode sizes or what have you. That is the format that Dungeon Master Johnny was going with. That I think is probably the best middle ground, and I really quite liked that sort of a format. I think it's more engaging to watch, at least, because it allows you to still be watching people playing Dungeons & Dragons or Shadowrun or whatever game if you operate in that format. But it's still like an episodic format because you're not meant to just be entertaining yourselves. It's supposed to be watched and engaged with by viewers that weren't at the table with you. So that's how we were doing that. And then there's the highly scripted style, which I don't think has any value, which is what people like Critical Role and stuff like that do, where everything is so highly scripted to the point where it is more a like endeavor of like acting pretty much than it is of trying to play Dungeons and Dragons. And I'm not really a fan of that. I think that it's sort of like a comedy or improv fantasy show that you're pretending to be like Dungeons and Dragons, and I don't know why you need that extra layer then. I don't know why you wouldn't just make another show at that point. I'm a fan of Hackmaster, right? And that comes from a comic whose name I'm forgetting now. But I think it's like Knights of the Dinner Table or something like that. Maybe I'm just confusing everything now. Maybe I look like a complete fucking idiot. I'm sure that I'll correct this in my description. But like you can make things that are related to D&D that are funny and comedy, and you could have a really highly scripted show that's related to Dungeons and Dragons. That would be fine. There's no problem with that. The issue is when you're trying to sell it to people that, like, this is how Dungeons & Dragons is played. When you're not really rolling dice, everyone knows that there's sort of a set format, and it doesn't really work that well. So that sort of live-streamed game, we're going to just completely discount. I don't think it's useful to talk about, because it's not really a live-streamed game. It's sort of just like a fake improv show, or a fake highly scripted show. One of the two. I'm not really sure. I haven't seen the scripts for it or something, so maybe I'm just talking out my ass. But the sort of thing where it goes way beyond being a formatted Dungeons and Dragons game into being a like a stage presentation almost, very high production value and stuff. That's not that useful to talk about, so I won't ramble on about that any longer. But there's sort of two extremes, and then a range in between just actually playing the game and making no changes and modifying things slightly into a more suitable format to be viewed on screen. And we were doing the latter of that. But there's a great range in between, and I'm sure people have all kinds of different opinions. But that's how I see things. And this is important for the character creation. So we were all given character sheets before the game started of how our character stats would begin. These were made to make sure that our characters kind of like wouldn't step on each other's toes. That's sort of a core tenet of the old D&D games, is that everyone has like a sort of role. My complaints about stats being too high in general in the last edition also kind of apply to the character sheets. But we were given them ahead of time, so that way he would know who he's dealing with, the Dungeon Master, in this situation. And each of his settings, his sessions, he had scheduled to be pretty much 3 hours long, which was quite a good length for that kind of thing. It's long enough to keep someone's attention span. Like, I like to listen to videos and stuff like that while I'm painting a mini or drawing or what have you, and that's a good length for me. I have a long attention span. So that was good. That sort of formatting was great. The main issue with the sort of live stream game for entertainment, as well as, or even more so than just enjoyment of the game, is that you end up in a situation where you are not the only audience anymore. Like in standard D&D, when I say D&D, I mean any tabletop game pretty much. You are both the player, in the theatrical sense, the player on stage, as well as the audience. So you're kind of trying to like one-up and entertain each other. You are like performing for yourself and the other players at the table. I.e. the Dungeon Master is sort of like, he's the director of everything. More similar to the director in like Left 4 Dead than a literal director. But he's trying to engage and entertain the players, right? And the player's trying to engage and entertain the Dungeon Master. Even there's mechanical systems that sort of abstract that process. But that's sort of what's going on in terms of engagement. Obviously the mechanics and stuff are more important than that, but that's sort of how the social aspect of the game functions. That's why it's gripping. With an online game, or a live stream game rather, you're going to have an issue where you are no longer the sole audience for the game. So you have to make things like progress forward, because you have this invisible group of people watching. Obviously, fucking Dungeon Master Johnny's Last Edition is never going to be as big as Critical Role or whatever, right? But you know that someone else is going to watch the game at some point and try to like connect with it. And as a result of that, you're going to need to try and keep things moving forward. So whereas you would argue about rules or whatever with your friends, and that could actually be engaging for you because you're learning about the game, you need to push forward. Or you cannot just go and start sandboxing during the game. You can't maybe do everything that you want to because you know someone else is going to watch it. It's not just like a private affair anymore. And that's sort of where a lot of the problems with a live stream game arise. When you're just doing like an actual play sort of session, that very baseline kind of game, especially for the older D&D stuff, like I was saying, it's not that engaging because you're just sort of ignoring the spectator, right? Everyone's just sort of doing as they would normally, especially if they're very good at like ignoring the cameras and stuff. And if you're very interested in like maybe playtesting a game or getting into an old school game and you can take that, it's the most rewarding to experience. Like if you were into like BXD&D and you wanted to get into AD&D 2nd edition and you watched actual play, that would sort of be the same as like if you were watching a play test or if you were doing something at a convention, right? Where you're not really part of it, but you can kind of like just sit there and watch and no one's really paying attention to you. That's a really good way to like evaluate a system, but it's not that watchable. In order to make things more watchable, you kind of have to make it less like a private game of Dungeons and Dragons. So when we were playing in this live stream game, there was this massive impetus to, or at least I felt it, to sort of keep things moving or make things otherwise more entertaining than I would have felt the need to if I was just playing on my own. And also to just play things up in general. I've said before that I have somewhat of a background might be an overstatement, but I've taken classes and stuff for stage acting and other aspects of production like that. And as a result of that, because you can kind of feel like the eyes on your back thing, you end up starting to be less like D&D. That's not necessarily that much of a problem, but I think that there's this big issue, and this sort of goes back into what I was saying about online games, where D&D and other tabletop games have kind of been the same experience for a long time, and now because you can watch other people playing in ways that appears to be better than the way that you play or your group plays, you have this like tendency, or new players have a tendency to want to make everything like very artificial. I think that's why stuff like Fate or not even rolling dice, shit like that, has gotten even more popular with role-playing games. And you're just sitting there and like reading a story to each other at that point. It's not really a game. It's weird. That is, the slippery slope that you are on when you are doing a live stream game. I think that's sort of an inherent danger of it. So, for a couple of examples, I know that during our game, I was playing a wizard. I think it was an elven wizard called Maduro. We were, we had, in one of the later episodes, a situation where the rules were not coherently written. I think I even brought this up in my review of the last edition. Like, one of the attacks didn't have its like tick damage or something, its damage over time, properly displayed in the rule book or something like that. And if we were playing Pathfinder or something with my friends, and there's a lot of rules that are kind of ambiguous there, we would have the time to spend an hour going on this like gigantic quest to find out the correct answer, to try to find like an FAQ with the developers or something like that. That's not really what happened during the game, which is fine. There's a lot of people who are fine. I'm just going like, look, DM, just like figure this out. We're gonna get to the end of the combat, and we'll figure it out after or whatever. Just make a house rule. We're gonna keep it for the whole campaign. That's definitely one way to play. That's not really the kind of player that I am a lot of the time. If I have the time and we're playing in private, obviously there's many exceptions, but I like to kind of try to do everything correctly, or at least know what the correct rules are in order to change them. With that situation, I was just like, look, Johnny, like, here's what it says in the rules, right? I'm going to read it to you because I already have it up on screen. Whatever your ruling is, we're just going to go with it. And that's going to be how it is. And we rolled with it, and it was fine. But it sort of ends up in the situation where that's not exactly accurate to how either of our characters is, as a player or as a dungeon master, right? Because I'm sure that if I'm kind of correcting him on his book, right, he would want to change that and then, make like a very decisive ruling, think about it for a couple of minutes. And then I, as a player, right, I'm now making the experience much more artificial in order to make it more engaging. Like I said, it's not an actual play. We are actually playing, but it's somewhere in the middle ground, right? It's more towards a scripted experience than an actual play thing. Not to say it's a scripted experience at all. That's not what we were doing. But it's not accurate to me as a player to just go like, yeah, whatever, in that situation. I probably would have tried to like think about it or hash something out with a dungeon master or whatever, even if it's going to take a while, because that's just an acceptable thing to do when you're just there and you're spending time with other people and you've already blocked off all that time. It's sort of a loss anyway. You might as well learn the game, right? So that's sort of a step towards artificiality. I probably shouldn't say this. Actually, fuck it, I should. This is supposed to be an educational channel. But one of the players that we ended up getting in the later episodes sort of, I don't think, understood that it's supposed to be an engaging experience for other people. I think that I mentioned this in my online games thing, because we were playing over the internet, that you need to really over-exaggerate and express yourself when you're trying to like reach other players through a fucking webcam and a microphone, or what have you like that. So it was a really, really huge problem that he was just sitting there like fucking with his coat d'arms painting fucking some kind of minis, I think, like Reaper Bones or something, I don't know, during the game. And you could see him like doing that. And there were a lot of other issues to do with like people being distracted or whatever. And I really didn't like, if you go and watch those videos, obviously I'm sitting in the fucking corner looking like a retard right now, but compared to other people's sort of setup quality, let's say, for a game that's supposed to be meant to be viewed as well as played, it was sort of frustrating that the general production quality was lagging due to people actually playing the game. And that's not really a problem, but it's sort of like a weird observation. Again, that slippery slope of like, I want you to be more an actor than a player. I'm glad that we didn't sort of like get together before the sessions and be like, okay, you're going to do this, and you're going to do this, and you're going to do this. That was like, that never came into the question, right? So it still ended up being like us actually playing the game, which is good. But I at least had a strong feeling to try and like move things along, or try to act more as my character, an interesting character in the story, than I would normally as a player. And then that also goes into the aspects of like dialogue and storytelling and things as well. Because I knew that the sessions would have to be pretty heavily scripted if you wanted to like have a known start point and a known end point for both the sessions and the game. Right? Because we couldn't just be doing that forever. If we wanted to do like a sandboxy game that just kind of goes all over the place, it wouldn't be that watchable for an online experience, because you would end up with the Dungeon Master making like 2 hours of content or whatever to play through as we've sandboxed into one village. And then if we decide to like leave and go fucking fight the dragon that was like mentioned in flavor text on a bulletin board, that's not created in as much detail, especially with the way that DM Johnny was playing with those like dungeon tiles and stuff, which was great, very good. He wouldn't really have time to like map everything out, and he'd be doing stuff on the fly, which is fine. Improvisation is a huge part of D&D, but there would have been issues, let's say. So that was a problem. Also, because we're now characters in the story, we can't just like run through the game like fucking, you're seeing like a speedrun of like Half-Life 2 or something, where, or maybe a speedrun's wrong, we're not clipping through walls and shit, but someone who knows what they're doing playing like Doom or Half-Life, and they know where all the key cards are, they know where the fucking switches are and shit. It's not as engrossing as when you're playing for yourself for the first time and you're like looking up like, wow, that's a really nice skybox, and like wondering, what's going to happen in this room. Because I knew that the sessions were going to be scripted to an extent, in the sense that like the dungeon has a limited number of rooms that are all predefined. There's a known start point and a known end point that we want to achieve within a 3-hour span. I didn't want to just like, point A, go to point B, and then finish the game in like an hour and a half. What I was trying to do was, and you'll see this with I think it was like the second or third episode, where we were out in the city trying to collect clues and things. I was trying to like get as much of the, get a lot of the like flavor that DMJ had like pumped into all these characters out into the video, because I didn't want to like waste all of his effort. And I think that I did an okay job of that. Like, I was providing big, long, alternate suggestions, right? Because it was sort of a mystery plot. I was saying, like, okay, maybe this is going on, maybe that is going on. Because part of a thriller or mystery thing, like what we were doing, was, or part of delivering that to an audience, I should say, is sort of misdirection, right? So I was more interested in the misdirection aspects. I think that if I was actually playing in a game, I would have gone even more overboard with that sort of role-playing stuff. But you also have to keep your character simple enough that somebody can view it. And I think that all of my points now are sort of going back to, I'm no longer the audience. I'm no longer the player and the audience, right? I am playing, and I'm sort of the audience, right? When the DM like puts down the board and he's saying, you're here, and I got this cool mini, and that's the boss. It's still engaging to me, right? I'm still the audience for that, and I'm still the audience for the other players, and I'm still playing in the scenario, but I'm no longer just concerned with like 4 people in the DM. I'm now concerned with like, how is this going to look when somebody else watches it? And that's sort of the, not necessarily the Achilles heel, but the sort of stumbling block, or even like the fulcrum for a lot of these like live streamed recorded RPGs, or TTRPGs, I should say, that that somebody else is watching, so over time you have a tendency to want to drift further and further from a like very private, intimate sort of like interpersonal experience and into something that is much more accessible to like this invisible outside viewer.